Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our final Wednesday webinar for 2020 to wrap up this year that has been very, very trying, I would say, and challenging, but at the same time has kind of put us all in hot water to help us show our mettle. I am Maria Fontenelle, Communications and Programs with the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, ECADE, which is hosting these Wednesday webinars, these regular sessions that just aim to try to get our community together to engage us during this time when everybody's at home and kind of, well, most people at home and isolated. Some of us are lucky enough to be able to go into work and meet with our colleagues and have that community that we can retire to ever so often. But the webinars just try to give us an opportunity to connect with each other and the wider network of activists, LGBTQ plus activists, feminists, youth activists, etc., HIV activists around the region and the community as well. And we also hope that it can help to stimulate discussion, build our network as well, and to help to build the capacity of our membership, because all the webinars are hosted by people within ECADE's network. And that would be, as I mentioned, activists across the board. And we will use, we have been using this platform as a means of doing that, and to also highlight things of note and issues of note that arise. This last session will be hosted by our friends from GrenCHAP. Thank you so much for joining us, Ajani. And we'll be discussing a safe and secure environment. But before we do, I just wanted to note and to remind everybody that we will be continuing our Wednesday webinars into 2021. We will not be having them as regularly as we did, which is every week. The regularity will be reduced. However, we will continue because this has proven to be so engaging. People have really appreciated the information that they've received, and it will be there for posterity on our YouTube channel that people can access the information and, of course, can get the opportunity to connect with the different organizations and the different activists within our network. And back to Ajani and his presentation. I don't want to take too much time. I will let Randall Theodule do the introductions, and he will continue. He's been doing a really good job at hosting the sessions and moderating the sessions, and he will continue to do so. So he will introduce the topic and he will introduce Ajani as well. But I just wanted to really just welcome everybody to this last session, which was a labor of love, because it's something I really wanted to do to just connect with everybody and just kind of give the community a space that we can come together and meet with each other and just keep our camaraderie and our relationships intact and just acknowledge the lived experiences of the community and of our friends and fellow activists within the movement in the Eastern Caribbean and beyond that. So welcome and thank you, and I will send it over to Randall.
Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Like Maria said earlier, today we will be discussing safe and secure environments on and offline. And this Wednesday webinar is in observance of International Human Rights Day, which is celebrated tomorrow, December 10th. And that is being hosted by Ajani Benoit, who is the former programs coordinator at GrenCHAP. Ajani was the programs officer at GrenCHAP from 2018 till 2020. GrenCHAP is a sexual reproductive health rights and human rights organization working with the LGBTQI community, sex workers, people living with HIV, and other marginalized groups. While at GrenCHAP, Ajani worked with diverse community to ensure that LGBTQI people had a safe space. HIV and syphilis testing, was accessible for marginalized people and many other projects. So just a few things, like Maria said earlier, but I'm just going to reiterate that the session will be recorded for YouTube. Mute your mic when you are not speaking. And if you need to make a comment or ask a question, please use the Zoom raise hand option. And as always, let us be respectful in our comments. And now I will turn over to Ajani, who will take on from here. So welcome again, everyone.
Thank you, Maria and Randall, for that introduction. And thank you for also inviting us to participate today. So today I'll be talking about a safe and secure environment on and offline. And one of the first things I want to address is what do we mean when we're talking about safe and secure environment? And for me, the way I really define safe and secure environment is an environment that is free of violence, where people can express themselves without fear of repercussion from government, without fear of repercussions from religious institutions or any other individuals. And in discussing safe and secure environment, I also think that it's really important to identify the actors that are involved in the delivery of a safe and secure environment. And some of those actors really kind of start off with the institutions, so like the state institution, which is comprised of legislative, the executive branches of government, the judiciary, as well as police force. The state institutions are primarily responsible for creating legislation, creating laws that govern our societies. And sometimes these laws are discriminatory, as an example of this would be the buggery laws that are present within most of the OECS countries. And sometimes they just do not create laws that really aim at protecting marginalized communities. The next institution is religious institutions, so churches, mosques. Religious institutions primarily play the part of socializing people, spreading values or morals of a given society. The following institution is educational, so schools, universities, which are pretty much responsible for the dissemination of knowledge as well as socialization. We also have healthcare and individuals. Now, all these institutions really work together in creating an environment that is either safe or unsafe for LGBTQI people. And they work together in different ways. So for example, with the state institutions, we have discriminatory laws like the Buggery Act. We have a police force that sometimes is not welcoming to LGBTQI people. We have religious institutions that reinforce the ideology that homosexuality is wrong, and they don't really preach tolerance. We have educational facilities that are failing at their mandate to educate the masses or incorporate a human rights perspective within their curriculum. And all this kind of comes together to create an unsafe environment for LGBTQI people. Now, imagine if you are a victim of domestic violence now, an LGBTQI person victim of domestic violence. You are less likely to report that to the police because one, you're already being discriminated against because of discriminatory legislation. You're at more of a risk of sexual violence. You're at more of a risk of receiving discrimination within healthcare settings. So you kind of end up being discriminated against in many different settings. So that's kind of how these institutions work together in terms of creating an unsafe environment. There is a direct impact on the LGBTQI community in terms of healthcare that a person may receive, increased risk of violence, increased school dropouts. There's also a mental health component to it. There's also increased unemployment, housing discrimination. So an unsafe environment in the Caribbean is kind of very detrimental to LGBTQI people. I kind of wanted to touch on a safe and secure environment within digital spaces. We are increasingly more connected because of platforms like Zoom, WhatsApp, Facebook. And these really kind of work at connecting us to each other. It also makes it a lot easier to share information. In Grenada, we've had a couple cases in which LGBTQI people may have been LGBTQI people have been recorded having sexual intercourse and it being leaked via WhatsApp. We've also had cases in which people's HIV status is broadcasted on Facebook or other social media platforms. And what we're kind of realizing is that the internet, which was supposed to be this amazing piece of technology that is used to connect us, it also can be used to create an unsafe environment for LGBTQI people that translates on and offline. So it's really important that we kind of start understanding how that works. So I feel like we should kind of talk about some of the strategies that we can utilize to mitigate some of the risk involved with online platforms. So just bear with me. Keep in mind, I prefer to have a discussion. So I will ask questions and hopefully people will answer. Is that okay, Maria?
Yes, that is fine.
Okay, because I prefer discussion-based. I feel like discussion-based conversations tend to be more enlightening and stuff. So the first question I kind of have for the group that is present today, like, what are some strategies that you employ when you're online to make sure that you are safe? Anyone?
Well, for me, I would say the first part is ensuring that my quote-unquote friends list is properly vetted, and I don't share anything that's too personal.
That's a good one, actually. I think it's important that we vet our friends list. It's also important that when we are sharing information about ourselves, that we keep it professional, and try to limit the kind of information that we share about ourselves. So people don't need to know your address. You don't need to share that on social media platforms. They don't need to know your relationship status. They don't really need to know these kind of things. You should just really, if you have a Facebook account, you should really just have your name, and that's essentially all the information that you really need in terms of that. What are some other strategies that we can utilize? I see using a VPN, which is actually a very good way. There's also password protecting your devices and your email. So we all have cell phones nowadays. It is important that you password protect your cell phone. Make sure that nobody has access to that. Password protect your emails. It's good to have a complex password. And it's also good that you change your password every so often. Make sure you never share your password with anybody. You don't share your bank ATM with people. Don't share your password with people. Any other strategies people can think of?
So not even your significant other?
Oh God, no, never.
No, Maria, no.
Your
no.
significant other,
No.
maybe.
The one you're not supposed to give it to, no?
Pardon?
Your significant other is the one you keep it away from.
Yes, well, here's my thing is that a significant other can become an ex quite easily. So you don't really want to share information with them that they can then use against you if you have a bad breakup. We can also it's also important that we're careful about people that we meet online whenever we're meeting them in person. So can anyone tell me like why that's important, that we should be careful? And what we probably should do if we intend to meet somebody online?
I mean, online people could portray to be someone that they're not. And I mean, when you meet them in person, it's a completely different story or not who exactly was behind the screen. So I guess that's one of the biggest issues people have and why they should protect themselves more.
Yep, exactly. The thing is, people portray themselves differently online. You also run the risk of being a victim of a violent crime sometimes. So whenever you intend to meet somebody online, it is important that you meet them in a public space. You let your friends and your family know exactly what you're doing, who you're meeting, when you're meeting, and give them your contact information just in case you need them to follow up on you. What are some other methods that we can utilize to protect ourselves online?
Ajani, even
Yeah.
even doing all of that, it's so not safe. We had a situation, all of that was done, because then again, because of the person sharing the wrong information. So when your friends go looking, you know, I mean, we know it firsthand. When your friends go looking, what they're looking for and who they're looking for, the crime has been committed. You understand? And you're not there to say who was the actual person.
That, you know, that's a very good point. And
I mean, we know it firsthand.
It does happen, but it's really important that we mitigate the risk that it is involved. So meeting in a public space is something that I think is really, really important, especially if you intend to meet somebody online. But you should always, 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 and I can't stress this enough, always have a plan, especially when it's a stranger. Can we think of other ways that we can protect ourselves within a digital space?
Difficult, or how else can you protect yourself?
How about being careful about what we post? Because as we know, on the internet, nothing is actually deleted. Once you post something online, it's there essentially forever. People can then copy it and share it. So once it's on the internet, you really kind of need to be careful. So be careful with what you're posting. You may not want to post anything sexual. You may want to be careful about that. If you're making a post that may be considered political, you may want to rethink that. It's always important that when we're posting that we kind of think about what we're posting, read it through, think of the implications that this may have in our professional life as well as our personal life.
What would you consider something sexual? What are the parameters of that?
So I personally, I wouldn't post anything that is pornographic of myself online. So
what's pornographic? Because
I wouldn't post any kind of sexual videos of myself. I also tend to be particular about photos of me with a significant other. I think that when I'm online, I feel like I only need to share limited stuff with people online. If you want to know me more, then you can come to me. We can have a drink, we can hang out, and I'll share my life with you as a friend. But I don't need to share it on an online space where it's there permanently, where people have access to it that I may not want them to have access to. So I try to limit the kind of stuff or content that I have online. You can't really take, once it's on the internet, it's really hard to take down or take it back. So what would you think is sexual, Maria?
Well, it would depend. I know, for example, you might put a picture of yourself suggestively laying on your bed with scant clothing. That may be considered sexual. For other people, that's just another day, not just another IG picture.
I mean, so, that is true. And also, it's an interesting point that you kind of raised. For example, with women, we know that in social media that there is a different standard for women and men. Men are allowed to show their nipples and chest, whereas women are not. And that kind of goes into how we sexualize women's bodies versus male bodies. So you can actually have a very long debate about what is considered sexual and not sexual on Facebook. And depending on the pose, people may kind of think of it as being sexual when in fact it may be innocent. So I feel like that's a very long, fruitful discussion that we can have. Anyone can think of any other kind of strategies that we can use online to reduce our risk? Anyone? Go ahead. Okay. Well, I feel like I should probably call on people. So I'm going to pick on Danny. Is it Danny? You have any suggestions on how people can protect themselves online?
Well, I'm actually here. Um, I mean, apart from the things that we've been talking about, VPN, the being careful what you post, the what else did you say?
VPN, being careful what we post, meeting people online,
Right.
using strong passwords.
All right. It also think about the websites and stuff that you visit, and like how how you visit them. You know, a lot of people use the incognito to visit certain places, certain sites that help protect your information if you are going on sites that maybe CDs or stuff like that.
Maria actually just made a comment that's really important, not sharing your location in real time. For anyone that has used the app Snapchat, it actually shares your location in real time. So if you are one of those people that use it, a good suggestion is to put yourself in ghost mode so that you're not sharing your location. All right, so those are some of the strategies that we can utilize online to kind of reduce our risk. How about offline? As we know, LGBTQI people are at increased risk of violence. So in our daily lives, what can we do to mitigate our risk?
What I think would work, I guess, the area you're going to see, if it's a good area, or like if it's friendly enough, or if it's safe for you, or if you're going someplace that's dangerous or bad, at least have people there with you. Also, you know, going there during a time, where it's safer for you than being, let's see. For me, like for example, certain places like I probably prefer going morning, daytime than having to go late afternoon into the night. Because for me, that's safer than going at a specific time where I know mostly all those who considered gang members, would be around sitting and stuff like that. So I guess that's one of the things that we could look at, and it would protect us more. Yeah.
That's actually a very good point. So visiting places during the day or at specific times, going to places with groups. If a person's going to go out at night, what I always say is go with your friend, never go by yourself. Make a plan before you leave your house. You have to think about how you're going to get to your destination, who's going to be there, who are you going with, how are you getting home at the end of the night. So you really want to kind of think things through before you leave your house. What are some other strategies that we can use to ensure that we protect ourselves?
I see Robin mentioned using a buddy system, and you mentioned that as well, making sure you go out with somebody. But I think based on, again, a lot of the stigma and a lot of LGBT people feeling that they don't have a lot of recourse in terms of meeting people. You may not have a forum to meet new people, so oftentimes you do it on an app, and then the person themselves also worry about their safety and security and being exposed as non-heterosexual may require or ask that you maintain privacy around the fact that you're meeting them, the place you're meeting them, etc. So I think sometimes going with a friend, may not be something that somebody would want to do. Like, it may not seem practical. So I think another option might be at least telling somebody where you're going. If you meet somebody on Grindr, you have their profile or whatever. And we know people don't always share pictures that reflect their face or whatever, but you share that when you get to the place, making sure you have a data plan. So if you want to maybe at least let them know this is the person I was supposed to meet, I actually met them, etc. We're actually going to this place. Just informing somebody as time goes on where you are. I was supposed to have met you at Rodney Bay. When you got to Rodney Bay, you're in a vehicle and said, let's drive down to VG Beach. I could at least let somebody know, hey, I'm living in Rodney Bay and I'm driving down to VG Beach with this person, especially when somebody you haven't met before. And it's good to at least just share that information. So having at least a data plan or being able to text somebody where you are and if the plans of the person changes. I think that's also important. But it's a bit troublesome and people don't always want to do it because then you feel like you're letting people into your business and like you have to know who I'm with and all this personal stuff is out there. So then there's also having somebody that you can trust with your information.
So I completely agree with you. I think it's important that if we intend to meet somebody in person that we met online, that if we're going to meet them in person, that we let somebody know exactly what we are doing, who the person is, how we can be reached if we're changing our location or going to a different location, letting somebody know. We all have a friend that we can share this information with, and it is better to be safe than sorry, in my opinion. And I believe one of the persons earlier mentioned that there have been cases in St. Lucia, I believe, where the person may have done all the correct things when meeting somebody online and they've still been a victim of a violent attack. You can do all these things and still be a victim, but you can mitigate the risk to you. And it's really part of what we're doing, or part of what we're talking about, is really mitigating risk, because there's always going to be some form of risk, right? I feel like we can also talk about the role that reporting violence against us and how that is important. Can anyone tell me why that's an important thing that we should do? What is first of all, can we think of reporting as an option for mitigating risk to us? Is there any kind of benefit to reporting?
It depends.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, was somebody else speaking?
That's okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think when we think about reporting, it doesn't always have to be to the police, I think that as a lot of people think, we could also utilize regional reporting mechanisms or reporting mechanisms that are anonymous, like the shared incident database reporting mechanism that I know is used in a lot of different Caribbean countries. Or, I mean, the police is fine as well, but I know that there is obviously a tense history with the police and marginalized communities, particularly LGBT people. But I do think that it's important to report because I think it sort of substantiates the argument that we see a lot of the time, that is that there is discrimination against LGBTQI people. And people sort of need or require evidence often to substantiate those claims. So I think having data and statistics and incidents that can be pointed to as evidence is really, really important, particularly when it comes to things like lobbying and having laws change and instilling different discrimination policy on an institutional level. I think it's really important to have those figures to sort of back up the work that we're doing. And also when we're developing programs for our community, I think it's important to say, hey, this is what we're experiencing. These are the amount of people who are attacked and reported it over the last year, over the last, whatever period. And this is why we need this project. This is why we need this funding, these resources. So I think it helps to back up a lot of the narrative, which we share quite often.
Thank you for that, actually. You are entirely right. So what happens is we all know that for LGBTQI people, it's particularly challenging to report crimes against them to law enforcement officers. So it is a lot easier to report it to a civil society organization like GrenCHAP, like Equals, like ECADE and United and Strong. And the shared incident database captures that data that can then be used to lobby on behalf of LGBTQI people, used as a form of monitoring the human rights situation in any kind of country. And also CSOs play an important role in terms of facilitating redress or facilitating further reporting when necessary. So thank you very much for that, Roran. Anyone else want to chime in on reporting? No? Okay. What are, can we think of some more strategies that we can use offline in terms of to protect ourselves?
Self-defense, having some knowledge of self-defense.
So self-defense is actually a good one. Whenever I'm walking down the street, I actually carry my keys in my fist. So if I'm attacked or if somebody approaches me, I can cause significant damage. But personally, personally for me, I'm not really a violent person, so I try to avoid that. What are some other methods that we can employ? Anyone? So
I guess, like I mentioned earlier, knowing where you're going, who you're going with, who you're going to meet, make sure it's safe, it's secure. And I guess another thing might be, having something in your pockets or your hands to defend yourself, or just being able to know how to fight or something, or like have, close contact. You could just go try to escape a situation as best as you can, or try to avoid a situation that is as best as you can. And also, like examples, you have your X money, because you never know if you're in a place and you just see, okay, it's about to happen, let me just run, I could get a taxi or something to leave right away, do that, and just go on, and you avoid the situation that will be just best for you. Yeah.
okay,
Hi.
so I agree with that. I also think that one way that we can also mitigate our risk is actually reporting violence to police sometimes. I know that we just kind of talk about reporting and how sometimes it can be challenging, but law enforcement has a duty to protect you from violence, protect your property. So utilize them. Know your rights before you even report. You should know your rights. And the reason why I say that, because in Grenada, we've had situations where law enforcement refused to take police reports or take a police report from members of the LGBTQI community. But because people knew their right, that they had a right to report crimes against them, they were able to elevate the situation to somebody higher within the police force. So utilize the institutions that you have available to you for redress. Anyone else?
Hi. So here is one that actually was told to me by my partner, something that I never thought of. For those of us who drive, sometimes on the way to our vehicle, we tend to unlock it before we even get too close to it. And I did it one time in his company, and he said, I shouldn't unlock my vehicle until I am next to it and I can get into it immediately, because you never know who is watching you and who might use that as an opportunity, whether it is to attack you or to steal your vehicle as you are getting into it. So it's something that we don't pay attention to, but and it's something that we do very, very easily, because I know I do it a lot. And yes, it's for those of us who drive. That's another safety measure that we can pay attention to.
That's a good point. And also we can kind of take into consideration having somebody walk to the car with us, especially if it's late at night. So I think that's a good one. So these are all kind of ways that we can utilize, methods that we can utilize to reduce our risk. How do we envision CSOs or civil society in this, in the delivery of safety and security? What is the role of civil society?
I think something that's really important for civil society when it comes to safety and security is assessing our own like safety risks that exist in the way that we operate, both offline and online. And that's for our community as well as like staff and volunteers and stuff like that. So I know that in Barbados, for equals, we did have a safety and security training that was done by ECADE. And I think that that training is something that can be really useful, or similar trainings like it is something that can be really useful to civil society, because we do deal with such vulnerable populations. And I think that there's so many things that we don't think of, like making sure that our space is safe, both like physical safe spaces, as well as our like online spaces and our like WhatsApp groups, and, you know, like our pages and that kind of stuff, and making sure that people's information is protected. So I think that that's something that's really, really important when we're thinking about like the role that civil society plays, that we need to make sure that our spaces are safe first. But I also think mechanisms like the shared incident database, which is sort of led by civil society organizations on the ground, is really important. And I do think that there's also a role to play with civil society when it comes to bridging the gap between these vulnerable and marginalized populations and the police, because there is such a like strained relationship, and I think people often feel really vulnerable or afraid to report on their own. So I think it's really great when people come to an organization, be able to go to the police with the support of that organization. And in Barbados, we try to guide people to the police officers whom we have a relationship with and whom we know are supportive of LGBT people and are sensitized, and people who we've done trainings and stuff like that with, as opposed to somebody walking into a police station alone when they might be very vulnerable, you know, especially if they're gender non-conforming and stuff like that. So it's easier to sort of bridge that gap and help people and support people when they want to report something, but they don't really know where to go.
Excellent. There's also, I think that's also important to kind of talk about that civil society, and most of our civil societies within our region are very grassroots, and we really need to kind of start moving in a direction where we are actively engaging the institutions that are responsible for safety and security. So that means engaging the state as an institution in terms of reforming laws that are discriminatory, educating law enforcement so that they can respond in an appropriate fashion to LGBTQI people, not just LGBTQI, but also people living with HIV, sex workers, and making sure that they know the law and that they know how to engage vulnerable people. I think that one thing that we also typically do not do in civil society enough of is the engagement of religious institutions in terms of their messaging. One thing is, I feel like religious institutions play such a major part in the homophobic climate that people in the Caribbean experience, but they don't do enough in terms of preaching tolerance. So I think that I feel like civil societies in that unique position where they can really properly engage other organizations. Anyone else have any thoughts on how CSOs, or what role CSOs play?
I mean, that's what I was going to say, but you just mentioned, you know, adding on to what Rohan said, I think, you know, the religious institutions, probably the health facilities where, you know, members of the community could go and feel, and where they don't feel safe or feel like they're discriminated against and stuff. Civil society organizations could engage in conversation with these various sectors and see ways in which things could improve. I'm not saying that, you know, they will right away, but over a matter of time, like it could get better, or they will feel safe enough to want to go back to these spaces. So,
Ajani,
Yes.
I'm not being a devil's advocate, but pray tell, how would guide me again on the using the engaging the religious institutions as a way of as a safety net?
Well,
I'm going Caribbean-based.
more in terms of trying to reform the societies that we live in. So in Grenada, what I feel like we did not do enough of is the engagement of religious institutions. They are the primary agents for the spreading of certain values within our countries. I think it's important that we identify our allies within religious institutions and work with them in terms of promoting a message that is based on tolerance So, and if a religious institution is going to reinforce the ideology that homosexuality is a sin, they also need to reinforce the ideology that we need to be tolerant of people that are different than us. And religious institutions, in my belief, have not done a great job at reinforcing tolerance, but civil society hasn't done a good job in Grenada, at least, in terms of holding religious institutions accountable for their rhetoric and making sure that they preach more tolerance rather than divisive or hateful speech.
Okay, I get you. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point when it comes to engaging faith-based like institutions and organizations in the region, because I do feel like there's a really loud bigoted presence in the region when it comes to gender and sexuality issues, but they don't represent the majority of the faiths that they claim to represent. So oftentimes we'll find that they're faith-based leaders or faith-based organizers who are in support of more progressive ideologies, but they're just not as loud or not as visible and not as present as the people who are really aggressively hostile. So I think it's important for civil society to make the connections with those people who are allies and sort of have them hold their counterparts accountable as well, and also engage their congregants, because I think it's much easier for messages of tolerance and respect and acceptance and non-discrimination to come from faith-based towards their congregants as opposed to like LGBT persons themselves. And it's also safer for the leaders themselves to speak to their engage as opposed to vulnerable persons themselves or people who might not even be up.
I agree with you. And one thing I kind of think it's also important to note is that a lot of faith-based organizations within the region also operate schools, sometimes clinics. So to not really engage faith-based organizations is a mistake in my mind. And it's really important that we really engage the leaders of faith-based institutions. So not just being strategic in how we engage them. So the next thing is, you kind of also touched on allyship, which is another important thing in terms of security. So what is the role of allies in promoting a safe and secure environment? How can somebody be a good ally?
By being an active bystander. If you witness a situation where somebody's in danger, potentially in danger, using your voice to not necessarily intervene, but also to seek assistance if necessary. That can be one way.
Being an active bystander, yes. So standing up to bigoted behavior. Also, I think that it's important that we are that we're empathetic. So if you're an ally, one thing that you probably should do is create a safe space for LGBTQI people. Listen to an LGBTQI people talk about their experience. When your friends make a comment that is homophobic or problematic, call them out on it. Kind of doing these things as an ally help create an environment that is safer for LGBTQI people. What are some other ways that an ally can work in terms of creating a safe environment? How about being accountable?
I think for me, one of the ways that a friend or anyone could be an ally really is to just be that supportive friend or be that person that you could count on, and at least they should be able to defend you know, people within the community, if something bad is said and you're not there, or if something is said about you, they should be able to defend you, have your back, or even the community at large, and I just say, you know what, hey, what you're saying is wrong, it's bad, I think you shouldn't say that. Like, just be that defensive. Well, I wouldn't say really defensive, but you know, just be there.
Standing up for people
And
who cannot speak up
speak
for
out
themselves.
when you need to. Yeah.
Standing up for people who cannot speak up for themselves, that's one way. Also, allies don't know everything. And when you make a mistake as an ally, it is important to be accountable for that mistake, own up to your mistake. If you make a comment that is transphobic or can be perceived as transphobic, apologize and try to learn something from the experience. Anyone else? I see aspect of supporting advocacy and criminalization, anti-discrimination, etc. from Maria, or was that Milton?
I think something that's also important when it comes to allyship is just recognizing all of our different intersectionalities that come into play with our identities. So I think quite often people within marginalized communities, I don't know, feel like they can't replicate oppression because they're marginalized in some way. It's important to think about the ways that we all are privileged, even within our, marginalized identities. So, people who are queer can still perpetuate a lot of transphobia. People who are LGBT but able-bodied still perpetuate a lot of, ableism, and there's classism and all of the different isms. So I think it's really important to be able to identify that within our own spaces as well, when we're thinking about allyship and the ways that we can be allies towards people who are also part of our community but marginalized in different ways as well.
Which is a very good point, especially when you kind of start thinking about the histories behind a lot of the organizations that came up in the Caribbean. A lot of them were focused on, initially were focused on HIV work and targeting MSMs rather than targeting the LGBTQI community as an umbrella. And it has really kind of sown this sentiment that gay men experience more discrimination than lesbians, trans, or bi, which is a false narrative. But it's something that really needs to be addressed within our region. And it's something that civil society organizations also need to address in terms of incorporating more of a gender or a feminist perspective within our mandates, incorporating increased diversity within our organizations. I feel like I've heard things from other organizations or other people about some of the challenges that they face, like working for an LGBT organization and not being paid, but once they left the organization, the man being hired and the man then being paid. We need to kind of address that within our organizations and within our community, because we are all different. We all have different issues. Our identities kind of intersect and we are all privileged in different ways. So I think that's a very, very good point. Anyone else? Well, if no one else has any questions or things that they would like to add, I'm pretty much done with what I have to say. So Randall, Maria, thank you so much.
Okay, I think I probably have one question for you, Ajani. And I think that has to do with the members in the LGBTQ community in Grenada. I mean, how safe it is, would you say, for these people in the community? Like, what exactly, has there been any incidents where people felt like they were violated maybe by just walking in a specific area, or any place where they just not comfortable at all, like they wasn't feeling safe or anything like that?
So in Grenada, there have been cases in which LGBTQI people have been attacked in public spaces. A couple years ago, there was a a trans person who left a karaoke competition who was then attacked outside of a venue. Fortunately, law enforcement was present and they were able to provide assistance to the said individual. There have been cases in which LGBTQI people have been at increased risk of sexual violence. And I think it's an issue that is very prevalent, not just in Grenada, but within Caribbean society. We know that with stigma, with discrimination, there is increased risk of violence.
Okay, and the other question is, does GrenCHAP have any programs or sessions where they teach community members about security and safety?
So GrenCHAP has a monthly snacks and chats session that they talk about various issues that impact the community. What GrenCHAP has been doing lately is having these sessions be facilitated by volunteers, by members of the community, so that they can talk more directly about the issues that are impacting them. And GrenCHAP will provide the support. Danny will probably be able to talk a lot more about what's going on with GrenCHAP because I'm the past program coordinator. Danny's currently functioning in that role. Additionally, GrenCHAP utilizes the shared incident database to document rights-based violations. And when somebody reports to us, depending on how they want to proceed, we will provide assistance in reporting it to the police officers or going to medical professionals for assistance. So it's dependent on whether or not the person wants to seek redress or proceed further. We will do our best to support them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if anybody else has any questions. If you do, now is the time to do so.
I do have just an additional point. How do you, especially when you work at a community level, and you mentioned Danny's doing the work now more so than yourself, but how do you at a community level have that conversation? Because you mentioned you have these sessions, but what is the community's feedback in terms of the sense of they having a right to, as you mentioned earlier, doing things like sharing sexual content, meeting people in what may be considered unsafe situations, sharing information that's personal, or sharing information with your spouse. What's the general feedback in terms of people feeling as if that they have rights that are being, like they may also feel as, they may almost feel like you're violating their rights by giving them guidance as, also how to be in the digital space, because being in the digital space now, it's just part of our lives. It's something that many people don't even give a second thought to in terms of how much they share and consider it to be a risk. Some people don't consider it to be a risk. So what is the general reaction in terms of people feeling as if it is their right to be in that space and to represent themselves, whether they feel they're a sexual being or they set in a thirst trap or something? Like, is their right to be out there and to represent themselves in that manner, and nobody should or can tell them how they should represent?
So I think that people have the right to express their identities in any way that they please. But it's also important that we are aware of the repercussions that may follow because of that. I think that it's also important that we know how to mitigate risk to ourselves if we decide to express our identities in any kind of particular way. So if a person wants to express their digital life in a way that I'm not comfortable with, it's not my position to judge them, but it's important that I provide them with the necessary information to ensure that they are protecting themselves. The next thing is, in Grenada, we have legislation that actually criminalizes the sharing of digital content without consent, especially if it's of a sexual nature. So people need to kind of also be aware of that in Grenada, because if you're sharing content of somebody without their consent, you can actually find yourself in legal trouble or be arrested for a criminal offense.
And how would you advise organizations in the instance where an individual repeatedly acts in a manner that that puts themselves and others at risk, and having been advised, having been cautioned, etc., continues to act in that manner, their rights are violated to some extent. However, they do have some responsibility. How would you advise organizations to deal with community members who may come to them for assistance, but who you are aware that you are that who has the information and who has been, let's say, educated around the risks?
How I would advise organizations to the thing is, civil society organizations, especially ones working with an LGBTQI community, have a mandate to work with their community. And sometimes we may become impatient in terms of saying that we've told people this over and over again, but we really need to keep our own kind of opinions in check. We need to be professional when we're working with people from marginalized communities, and really work in terms of being non-judgmental and providing services that are of a particular quality, regardless of whether or not somebody is doing something repeatedly. Does that answer your question, Maria? I'm just wondering.
Somewhat. It's good advice, but in the practical sense, it can be trying to attempt to protect somebody who doesn't seem to get the point that they also have a responsibility to be active in protecting themselves and reducing their own risk. Again, as you said, there will be risk, but you should implement, although it might seem bothersome, it might seem to be curtailing your own freedoms, but you have a responsibility yourself to protect yourself as well. And of course, just the sense and the knowledge that a lot of your risk is not because you're doing necessarily anything wrong, but because of the attitude of the general public towards LGBTQ plus people. So because of that discrimination, that you are facing particular risk, you are at higher risk than any other individual in public because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity or your expression. And it may seem to feel so unfair. So why should I have to change my behavior to a society that is discriminating against me for reasons that are not valid? And people can become frustrated, and that could be, especially over a lifetime, you feel as if you have the right to express yourself as you wish. So it may seem unfair and untenable for somebody to curtail their actions or change the way they express themselves based on a risk that is not in their mind. That's not fair. So I can see how it can be frustrating for both the organization that's trying to secure your rights and protect you, and for the individual who's trying to be able to live their lives normally without the constant fear being the way that you manage your just the way you walk in the community, to be guided by that and to constantly be aware and to be on the alert. That's it's a very uncomfortable way to live.
And especially when you kind of start thinking about how digital spaces can be unforgiving to trans people within our region. So a trans person who decides to express their gender identity or, within a digital space may face backlash within a particular society that an individual like myself who's cisgendered would not. So it is challenging, and I think that everyone should really kind of take into consideration the circumstances that they find themselves in, and that you do have, my opinion is that you have a right to express yourself in whatever way that you are comfortable. But it's also important that we know our risk, just to try to mitigate it. And for individuals who are expressing themselves, their truest selves, utilizing some of the strategies that we kind of talked about earlier may be useful, like vetting. You mentioned vetting your Facebook list or your friend list on social media as a way of kind of mitigating the risk to ourselves.
Yes, and I see we have a comment here from Danny. She said, because our groups are community-led, we give suggestions and they take what they think is relevant and applicable for them. Sadly, we have had some incidents occur where that have prompted individuals to think more thoroughly about their safety and how they engage in the online space and outdoors, so they are usually grateful for the information and help that we can give them, which I think is actually good, because I mean most times you provide all the information that you can and stuff, but then it's up to individuals at times. I got the information, let me see how best I could use it. But I mean, we can't force everybody to do what we want, but at the same time, helping them as much as possible and as much as how many times that we could, I think is also a good thing. Yeah. Yes, so if no more questions, I think, Ajani, this is where we say thank you very much for tuning in and doing this session with us. Um, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. And we hope to see you all next year where we start the Wednesday webinar again. And we will also look out we'll be bringing back the youth perspective next year. And also a bunch of various stuff that we were still working on. So look forward to these things next year and hope everyone have a safe weekend, and a great season. And see you all at the next few sessions that we have. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.